I mean, the.
Yeah, all right, good evening, everybody. This is a special presentation, I guess you call it, from our gentleman from Eide regarding the forensic study that was approved last February, when it started, February, March. So they have a presentation. Jason Olson is here, and go ahead.
That's mine. All right. I'll share my screen quick. All right. So can everyone hear me okay? All right. So just by way of background, I work for Eide Bailey, a CPA firm, top 20 in the country. I'm a forensic accounting partner within the firm. We have a team of about 25 professionals. I usually get involved in situations where there's some sort of financial dispute or concern. And so I know there were some concerns here with respect to charitable contributions and goodwill donations. And so we were engaged by the city to look into those contributions and donations and how they were used back in, I think, February 2025. And now we sit here, it's December 2025, so it's been several months. And it's been a little bit of a give and take on the information that we need to trace funds and so forth. And I want to thank Kent. I know you gave me information from the Fire Relief Association. Jason Baker and Mel here gave us information from the city. And Jim, I think you might have even provided some information at one point in time. And so I've been providing forensic accounting services for about 23 plus years for a whole host of reasons. Sometimes it's, it's just resolving financial concerns. Sometimes it's conducting financial investigations for civil or criminal purposes. And oftentimes it's to provide peace of mind over what's happened with finances. Okay. And what I'm going to walk you through today is a summary of where we're at today with this forensic accounting engagement. I'm going to walk through what the original scope was. I'm going to walk through the information that we considered, the procedures we performed, observations and recommendations. Okay. I'll even walk through some engagement challenges because as I talk about the scope, whenever you're dealing with historical information, right, going back more than just a few years, but 10 plus years, right? There's always gonna be some challenges, and it's not unique to your city, but in many of the clients that we serve, there's usually turnover with employees. There's potentially accounting records or supporting records that may not exist after several years, right? And so sometimes that presents a challenge, right? But that's not unique to this city. But we'll cover that in detail too. So I'll get started here. Hopefully you can see a lot of this, but if not, I'll just regurgitate some of this information. Like I said, we're engaged on February of 2025. Our main task at hand was review or perform a forensic accounting of the funds, the 10% contributions and goodwill donations provided by the Fire Relief Association to the city and how those funds were used, primarily for 2013 to 2024. And the reason why that is Kent, if you recall, you provided me with a spreadsheet that identified all the 10% contributions that were provided by the Fire Relief Association, as well as the goodwill donations during that time period, right? So we had a starting point from the Fire Relief Association as to what they provided, along with certain copies of canceled checks and so forth, okay? And as part of that process, we're here to report to you as to our observations and the process we went through. And so to kind of give you an idea, this summary table is a summarization of that spreadsheet provided by the Fire Relief Association as to the 10% contributions they provided over that time period, as well as the goodwill donations, with a total being about $300,000 during that time frame, okay? And so as part of that process, our goal was, okay, this is what the Fire Relief Association provided the city. How can we identify those being accounted for within the city's financial records? And we'll go through that. As part of that process, some of the information that we looked at, the primary information we looked at, there's audited financial statements. Of course, as you know, the city goes through an annual financial statement audit. And so we didn't recreate what the annual financial statement auditors do, right? Because they're testing financial statements to detect any sort of material misstatements, errors, omissions, and that kind of thing, right? So we're not going to recreate what they do, but we certainly look at what they put together on an annual basis and what they certify. We looked at general ledgers for Fund 100 and 425, primarily for the scope period that we talked about. Certain city council meeting minutes, more importantly, looking for resolutions. Also, the annual report that's submitted to the state regarding the 10% contributions and how those funds are used. And then other supporting documentation such as invoices and payment stubs and so forth. From the Fire Relief Association, as I mentioned earlier, primarily the information we looked at was the spreadsheet containing all the contributions and goodwill donations, and then copies of certain checks. We also received some bylaws too. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, some of the challenges, right? There's certainly been turnover at the employee level. There's availability of certain historical records. So for example, the annual report that's submitted to the state, on the gambling charitable side, we don't have records that go back to go past or predate 2019, okay, from an annual report perspective. And I'll talk a little bit as to why that was relevant or why it's relevant. There's certain board resolutions that we couldn't identify for some of the donations, which typically a board resolution would identify and document what the intended purpose of that donation is, okay? Certain accounting reports that may have provided more detail, we couldn't necessarily get for historical time periods, so like 2013, 14, 15. We were able to get other accounting reports back to that time period, but some reports like exports could provide a little additional detail that might have helped, right? Part of the observation, we saw some erroneous accounting recordations. So for example, there might have been a 10% charitable contribution that was characterized as a gathering permit or a park activity fee. We could see that in there, but then the good news is what we also see is correcting journal entries at year end. And I'm not surprised by that because it tells me probably auditors working with whomever is here at the point in time, correcting some of the erroneous entries that were made. Okay, and that's not unusual either. That does take place, that happens. And so that's a good sign that we saw those corrected journal entries. As part of this process, everyone that I've dealt with, I've mentioned the folks from all parties have been helpful to give me the information that I need to take a look at for this purpose. And so that's been great and really appreciate the access to information and everyone's help. So I want to first start on the 10% gambling contributions, okay? And so let me show you what for the time period in which we have the annual reports that are submitted to the state, the Minnesota Gambling Control Board. Let me just show on the left is a totality of from the Fire Relief Association, the spreadsheet showing the 10% contributions for 2019 to 2024, roughly $52,232. Okay, we can tie that basically to all the reports for that same year showing how those funds were used, and who signed it. And so we have that being submitted to the state. We have those for 2019 through 2024. They reconcile. We have a slight discrepancy between the Fire Relief spreadsheet, which it shows actually $51,610, so $622 discrepancy. It could be an aggregation of that time period. What I didn't want to do is further investigate that because every hour of our time might potentially exceed the benefit of us investigating a $622 discrepancy. But overall, the funds that are reflected on that spreadsheet from the Fire Relief Association appears to be accounted for within the reports that are going to the Minnesota Gambling Control Board. That provides some indication as to how those funds are used, at least related to 10% charitable contributions. As you can see, some of the expenditures relate to jackets for firemen, fire engine inspection updates, breathing apparatuses, those type of things. Okay, and so and just to kind of give you an idea of what those reports look like, if you're not familiar, this is submitted on an annual basis. And so it shows the funds that came in or contributed to that 10% contribution. And then it will also show how those funds were used. And then at the end, what you can see is it signed off by who prepared it. In this case, in 2024, it was Jason Baker. And then just to kind of show you, if I showed you earlier, the contribution was $10,407 for 2024. You can see that reconciles to what's reflected within the accounting. Okay, and I will say that for the more recent time period, 2019 to 2024, it's easier to trace through the accounting. It's like this is a great example where it's pretty clear cut. You can reconcile it. Prior to 2019, where we don't have these reports, it's a little more challenging because it's historical information, right? And some of that is tougher to tie out, okay? I'll explain that a little bit. But here you can see there's attachment of of the information that ties back to that particular expense, which this one here relates to the breathing apparatus, where $10,407 were used to support part of this $36,000 expense that was incurred. So for the time period 2013 through 2018, that predates that annual report, there's about $24,669 that was contributed during that time period, according to the Fire Relief Association spreadsheet. Roads traced at least 70% of that, so 17,000 to the general fund 100 ledger, dollar for dollar. We have a little bit of a difficulty in tracing dollar for dollar for 2013, 2014 contributions. And I think this is primarily due to the fact that there's historical information that we just can't really tie it dollar for dollar. So if something was aggregated, we can't necessarily reconcile it. Okay, but I do believe that it's mostly due to the passage of time. I don't have any other reason to believe that there's anything else. I haven't seen anything else that causes me to believe that funds aren't accounted for. It's just, when you're talking about 2013, 14, it's a challenge going back that far. Okay, what I will say, in a positive light, when I look at what was reported out, the audited financial statement for this time period compared to what was reflected in the Fire Relief Association spreadsheet, it reconciles within $400. So I think that's a good sign that it's accounted for. It was accounted for within the audited financial statement. I just can't necessarily reconcile it to the detailed general ledger. Okay, so that is a good sign from that perspective, and gives me confidence in the fact that those funds were collected and accounted for within the accounting. Goodwill donations. What this spreadsheet reflects are the donations made according to the Fire Relief Association from 2013 to 2024, $224,200. And the reason why there's blank spaces here is because we didn't have copies of checks and we couldn't find a board resolution. Okay, but we have the dates and when they're provided, because that's within the Fire Relief Association spreadsheet. There are certain transactions that we do have copies of checks. There's certain ones that we have board resolutions for, okay? And so part of this process is to look to see, can we account for these funds being deposited into the city's accounting, bank accounting, and how are they recorded, okay? And what I can tell you, we could readily trace 220,000 or 98.1% of these donations to General Fund 425. We traced 2,800, that $2,800 donation to General Fund 100 donations account. We weren't able to trace the $1,000 or the $4,000 Goodwill donation by dollar amount. It doesn't mean it wasn't accounted for, it just we couldn't readily trace it, okay? So we could trace the vast majority of all these donations into the accountings as we'd expect to, okay? And so how are those funds used? We have evidence to show that there was payments related to engine 1, 2 payments, and I rounded the numbers, of course, but 74,000 there. There was engine outfitting for engine number 1 of 60,000, 22,000 for brush 1 skid pack. There's $5,000 related to Gold Rush t-shirts, and then there's this unpaid gambling related tax that occurred in 2021, in which the city was reimbursed with $60,000 from those Goodwill donations. Okay. And so these expenditures alone add up to about 226,000, right? And this does not include engine number 2 and any outfitting that would have been supported from those funds, okay? So that, my point of showing this is that already exceeds what was contributed to those Goodwill donations, if that makes sense. And what I wanted to just briefly show is some of the support that is available for some of these things. So for example, engine number 1, year 1 and year 2 are the 2 payments, which were supported by the Goodwill donations. Engine 1 tools and equipment outfitting. So we got copies of payment stubs and invoices. The brush 1 skid pack, copy of the invoice and the related check payment stub that's for this invoice plus a few others. The Gold Rush t-shirts, the invoice, the check payment stub. The $65,000 unpaid gambling tax. There was an issue apparently back in 2021. This letter outlines what that issue was, and that they had to make a payment to the state Department of Revenue. And so we have a copy of that letter. And then just by frame of reference for engine number 2 outfitting that wasn't included that table, this is, at a quick glance, when you look at the you look at the general ledger detail, there's at least 69, I know there's more than this, but there's at least 69,000 you can really discern that were related to engine two outfitting that were supported with goodwill donations. Okay, and those occurred in 2024. So where we're at today, again, we're able to trace the vast majority of the funds going into the accounting. I'm comforted by the annual financial statement audits and lack of any deficiencies identified around any of the funds. We see corrective journal entries where there's errors made. I don't have any evidence to suggest funds were used for non-fire equipment related purposes, but for that $165,000 unpaid gambling tax that was paid. I will say with that particular payment, there was a board resolution that said that those funds were to be used for fire equipment, and they were used to pay for they're reimbursing for that unpaid gambling tax issue. Okay, so obviously, I don't know why there's that discrepancy, right? As far as what the board resolution said versus how those funds were used, but that is one thing that was observed through the course of this investigation. What I would say, looking at this matter and kind of how it came to be and probably some of the concerns that were raised as it relates to how these funds were accounted for, I think there's some good practices going forward. If everything were to stay the same as it is today, which maybe things will change because I understand that maybe there's some consideration of changing how maybe the 10% contributions are managed or handled, right? But I think a couple things. Those annual reports that I showed or shared, they should be maintained within the city, but also provided to the fire department for their own file retention. All those documents should be stored within the city's document retention and destruction policy. Okay. Board resolutions should exist for all these donations. I know I happened to see the 2024 financial statement audit for the city this year. I see that's a finding there. And I saw that after the fact, right? So we already had that as a recommendation. And that a board resolution really should exist because that's good for everyone to be from an auditability perspective, we can identify what the intended purpose of that donation was for, right? And it's going to be maintained and retained within the city's possession for in accordance with its document retention and destruction policy. I would also say that to the extent that goodwill donations are used for fire equipment, there should be copies of support provided to the fire department and the Fire Relief Association for their own file. So that way, again, from an auditability perspective, everyone has the same documentation as to how these funds were used, whether it's related to 10% charitable contributions or related to the goodwill donations. Okay. On our end, just to kind of let you know how we go about our services, right? We're providing consulting services by the hour. Okay. And there's always something we could potentially further investigate, but I'm also conscious of being fiscally responsible for our clients. And I haven't seen anything that suggests that it warrants further investigation based on what we've observed to date. So does anyone have any questions about what I said? I know I kind of went through that fairly quickly, but I'd like to address any questions that anyone has.
The $65,000 discrepancy that was unpaid tax, there was a resolution. I guess I'm not following on that section of it.
Yep. So there's a board resolution. The question was related to $65,000 unpaid gambling tax that related to some issue with gaming and a former employee, it sounds like, right? There was a board resolution when that $60,000 goodwill donation was made by the Fire Relief Association in December of 2021. It said that those funds were to be used for fire equipment. Those funds were used to reimburse the city for paying that unpaid gambling tax.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense?
City paid the gambling tax, fire relief reimbursed, but the resolution doesn't match.
It does not match. And now I certainly wasn't there to know if the resolution was recorded correctly, right? I can just tell you what the resolution says compared to how the funds were used.
Okay, that clears it up. Thanks.
So my understanding, right, did you say that you don't have data prior to 2019? It was 2019 forward that this is based on?
So no, let me clarify that. We have data prior to 2019. It's just we have better data from 2019 forward, right? So for example, let me just go back. If you look at, I showed this example of this annual report submitted to the Minnesota Gambling Control Board. We have that from 2019 to 2024. Okay? We don't have those prior to 2019. And I know, Mel, you tried to get those records from the gambling board and they don't have them.
They
either.
didn't have them either.
And why is that important? It's important because it's one more piece of information for us to consider when we're looking at the accounting of these funds and how they're used, okay? It doesn't mean that we still had general fund detailed ledgers going back to 2013. We absolutely do. It's just, it'd have been nice to have these going back to 2013, right? It's just one more piece of information for us to consider.
Is that something that the state decided they don't no longer retain those reports?
It could be based on their own document retention and destruction policy. I just know they don't have them based on the response you got back from the state. I saw it firsthand.
So going forward, if we were to make sure a resolution's written each time, we'll then better retain that information longer term.
Well, yeah, so typically most organizations will have a document destruction or retention policy, whatever you want to refer to it as. And that could be 7, 8 years, or it could be in line with some sort of state statute. Then you abide by that policy, right? And my point is, the same record should be provided to the Fire Relief Association if you continue to go down the same path of working together. That way they have it for their file, you have it for your file. But that should be not only these reports, but the board resolutions as well, right? And the support of how these funds were used. So that way all parties have complete knowledge of how goodwill donations were used, contributions were used, and so forth.
Those forms were submitted in 2023. That from 2019 to 2023.
Yeah.
The state requested.
Yep, I know they weren't filed timely. Yep, no, I know that piece. Yep, that they weren't filed timely, right?
Yeah, Shirley did that stuff, I think, when she was here, to get that stuff taken care of, so.
Yeah, I think Sonny started it. I think Shirley did.
And Shirley finished, yeah, what it was.
And then bank records only go back 7 years. So
Yep, and that's another issue too, right? Like, so that, and I know the city changed banks, right? So but this is not uncommon across any organization I help that wants to go back past 7 years, because you made a great point there. You can only get bankers going back 7 years, right? And that's the best source information, right? Because then we can say, yep, it was deposited right here. We see the back of the check, like you provide me back in certain checks. We can see it getting deposited in the Pioneer Bank. We know exactly what account. We can trace it to the county, right? That's your best source information. 7 years, you're limited to that from today's date going back 7 years. But I mean, we go, okay, well, that's best source. What else do we have? Okay, well, we have certain general ledger reports that we can run and so forth. And so we use that, okay? And that's what we had to rely on for some of the older dates. Outside of some of the things that I just mentioned. But I will say this, again, comfort of the fact that the auditors, they're there to look at the accounting too, right? And make sure balances are appropriate at year end. And I do see corrective entries, and that's a positive sign. Because like I said, I saw erroneous recordations of certain contributions made, but you can see the corrective entries, right? So that's a good thing. And I know that there's been, 3 different CPA firms, I think, that have come into the financial statement audit. So you have had not just one set of eyes, but you've had 3 set of eyes looking at the financial records as well. So that gives me a little bit of level of comfort as well.
A question about the donations. So whether the donation is coming to the fire department, first responders, or fire relief, they all need resolutions
So.
for any amount?
So,
$50 or?
so here's what I would say to that. One, I would always encourage you to ask that question of your legal counsel, right? Whoever the city works with from a legal perspective, to follow state statute.
Sure.
What I would say is, it's a good practice to have a board resolution in place for any donations made, because that way it's completely accounted for as to what the intended purpose was. So I would lean on the side of having documentation for all donations. But again, I'll encourage you to speak to the city's legal counsel to verify what the requirement is.
And that's not only monetary donations, but like,
All
in the
donations.
fact of, fire relief got the 6-wheeler you're on. Yeah, so bringing that in like a vehicle coming into the city, that's donated to the fire, which is a city. So that has to be put in there the same.
All donations.
It's technically, whether it's money or equipment, it's a donation.
Well, since banks generally destroy information in 7 years, it would probably be wise each year to download the banking information at the end of each year for Paper record.
It's, I would say, only again in the court, it has to be maintained in the, in abidance with the document retention destruction policy, right? I mean, we don't recommend clients hold on to records for 20, 30 years. That, I mean, that's probably not practical, although it sounds like maybe the city has retained some older records. But I would say, like, you want to have a very clearly defined document retention destruction policy, and you maintain it for that length of time, right? So I'm not going to advise you that you should hold on to it for 10, 15, 20 years. But what I'm advising you is for this situation here, it's being transparent and make sure that all parties have the same documentation. So that way there's no question as to the funds that were received and how those funds were used and what the intended purpose was.
So the 2013, 2014 donations, not really identifying where they went, so I'm assuming you looked at the revenue and expenditure reports of where the dollars could have gone into the parks or something like that, because that was a designated distribution for the 10% at one time about that time frame. So
Yeah, so I could trace and reconcile those numbers to the gambling tax and the audited financial statements. So I could see it reconcile, but I can't necessarily. What I was trying to do is go dollar for dollar, right? So every line item that Ken's spreadsheet, or I'll say Ken's spreadsheet, but it might not be yours, but the one that you gave me, I tried every single contribution. If it's for $105.10, can I find that particular deposit into the 2013 ledger? Okay. And what it looked like to me is sometimes I think there's certain contributions that might have been aggregated. So it might have been two contributions entered in as one, right? So I can't readily discern that. And I don't have anyone here from 2013 that can tell me exactly how they entered into the accounting. But so then I go, okay, let's back up. If I look at it from a holistic perspective for that year, can I get it to reconcile back to what the audited financial statements say? And I can. So in a perfect world, what I'd be able to do, I'd be able to tie each single line item for that older time period back to the accounting without question. But this is in a perfect world scenario, and we're talking about 2013 and we're sitting in 2025. But again, the audit financial statements tie back to basically the same amount that's reflected in that spreadsheet for that time period. So I'm not really all that concerned about, because it's within $400 for that.
it's your time, our money.
Well, yeah, I mean, to spend $450 an hour to investigate a $400 discrepancy, and if I spend 5 hours doing it, now is that a good use of the city's money?
Exactly.
Maybe not, right? But there's enough level of comfort where it seems reasonable. That's all accounted for based on what the audit financial statements say versus that spreadsheet.
Did you say that the Goodwill donations expenditures exceeded what was donated?
Yeah, so I was just showing you example.
Including engine two, or?
So that would be, well, actually, if I just show you. So this total here is roughly 226,000. This did not include engine two. So that exceeded the 224,000 right there, not including engine two, right? Because I separated it because a lot of these occur prior to 2024. The last large donation, I think it was 2021. I think it was a $60,000 donation was the last large one. Unless there's one in 2025. I didn't look at that, right? So yeah, so I wanted to just show, like, hey, your spreadsheet shows $224,000. We're seeing 226,000 just with these alone, not even including anything on engine two that would have been covered with some of the prior donations. And so I'll just briefly mention, if the city would like a copy of this PowerPoint, I'm more than happy to provide it. We did not write a written report. The reason being is, again, trying to be fiscally responsible. If there would have been significant findings, we would have drafted a report. But I think the recommendations speak for themselves. I think they're fairly clear. And again, they're in alignment also with what your financial statement auditors are saying with respect to board resolutions.
I'd like to have a copy of that. That'd be great.
Sure, I can do that.
No questions.
Somebody in the waiting room.
That's the one we don't want to let in.
Oh, that's the one that messes up the screen and
Yes,
makes
it
it
is.
black.
Right.
Good,
Back to
Very good.
multiple one.
good job,
Any other,
very good job.
any questions from online? As we switch back. Marie, are you still with us?
I'm here. No questions. Thank you for your time and diligence and helping us figure out how we move forward.
Thank you.
And that, you just had the one recommendation of taking all,
More recommendations than that, so I'll go back to that. So there's actually, 3 separate recommendations.
Not on there yet.
Oh, you can't see my screen, can you?
Sorry.
So again, retaining those annual reports, like I mentioned, and also providing those to the Fire Relief Association. Board resolutions should exist and retain within the city's document retention policy. And then providing the support used to support the use of goodwill donations, that should be provided to the Fire Relief Association as well. That way everyone has a copy of how funds were used or received in. And I'll just mention this third bullet point. If you look at your, it sounds like you just received a copy of the financial statement for 2024. That's in alignment with what the recommendation is. And I didn't see the report till today. And this was created before then, right? So we're on the same page as to what should happen with respect to board resolution. So I'd highly encourage implementation of that.
I just got those copies in the mail today, so they'll be in your boxes tomorrow. So if you want to swing by to City Hall at some point, pick them up.
we just did a whole group of resolutions, like a whole block of them, right?
Yeah, to get caught up. on
Recently
that.
to catch up on these.
Yeah,
Since Mel has come in and we've looked at this, you know, taking those resolutions and putting them in and accepting those has been good for the last maybe 4 months, 5 months. Where we've done that every month by pulling them in. So I mean,
That's
it's,
what Andrew had suggested to us.
yeah, no, I think that was great.
And
At
Schaefer
least
said
you've
the
got
same
the.
thing right away.
Yeah,
You
so,
guys have to be doing this.
so that's what, when we started doing that and
Which is good.
doing more of those, and we'll continue to do them that way each month. We'll have any donation resolutions come through. And then, I mean, this is easy. This is an end of year report. We can make sure they get all the documentation and get it to them at the end of the year, because we'll have the end of the year forms that have to be submitted at the same time. And I mean, it's all easy just to do all that, so.
So can you show the slide with the donations and the expenditures and the $666 difference, I guess it was.
Which slide?
That'd be the
First
first
sheet,
Are you talking about,
10%.
right?
Was it 10%,
are
right?
you talking about this one right here?
No, it's the one, it's a little bit further. No,
That was it right there.
That's the one that's off by 622.
Yeah, but
That's
keep in
the
mind,
report.
the difference here is the spreadsheet from the Fire Relief Association shows 51,610 from 2019 to 2024. Okay. The report shows actually more by $622.
Okay.
So reporting more is being received than what the Fire Relief Association. To me, that might be related to timing over the course of time. It'd be, you know, if it was flipped, it was actually less being reported and it was something more significant, it might be worth investigating, but it's actually the opposite of what you'd expect, right?
And it could be a December versus January on how
It's
it
a timing
goes
thing,
in.
right? Yes.
So,
I don't have any more questions. Thank you.
Very good job, Jason.
Mm-hmm.
Very good
Yeah.
job.
No problem.
All right, any other questions?
You're gonna send that to me?
Yeah, so I'll send the PowerPoint to Mel. I'll send it to you by tomorrow.
We'll
Okay.
get that out.
Then you're gonna send that out, Mel, to the rest of us? Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
we'll get it posted online as well, and so. It'll be publicly available.
We good? Everybody good?
All right, thank you, everybody online.
Thank you. Good job.